Well, Mohamad Elmasry is an Associate Professor of Media and Cultural Studies at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. Good to have you with us. I have to keep my teeth in at the moment, I think. Mr Elmasry, I mean, you've been watching events for the last 3 days, and what's really interesting is that this referendum is being perceived very differently within Egypt and outside of Egypt. It seems to sort of be a tale of two referenda.
Sure. So on the one hand, international media have been very critical, not only international media, but also human rights groups, as you indicated in your lead up. So the New York Times, Al-Jazeera, CNN, the Washington Post, they've written very critically about the referendum and some of the irregularities that have been witnessed on the ground, according to eyewitnesses and according to civilians who have participated in the voting. The Egyptian government has released a statement just within the last 90 minutes or so, essentially lamenting the international reporting, calling it false, and then going on to sort of declare the alleged democratic and free and fair nature of the vote. And that is to be expected. This is consistent with past narratives of the Egyptian government that there's sort of an international conspiracy against Egypt, participated in by the likes of Al-Jazeera, the New York Times, the Guardian, CNN, the Washington Post, and even human rights groups.
Indeed. I mean, if it's a foregone conclusion that Sisi sort of is going to extend this term, we've heard very little from the opposition during this process. So where does this sort of leave the voice of the opposition, dissent or even criticism within Egypt as Sisi extends his term?
Well, there is very little opposition in Egypt. The Egyptian government has done a very good job of consolidating power over the last 6 years. They've eliminated opposition parties. They've shut down opposition media. Just in the lead up to this vote, they've shut down 34,000 websites belonging to dissidents who were trying to organize a Batil, a void campaign. They also arrested political figures, about 120 of them in the lead up. They banned a protest that was scheduled. So there really is no space for dissent in Egypt at the moment. And I think, a lot of analysts are predicting that it's really a matter of time before there is another sort of protest movement, another uprising.
If that's allowed at all. I mean, if we look towards 2030 and the way and the direction that Egypt is going at the moment, we have to talk about perhaps the generalities of civilian life and what life will be like in terms of just the normal liberties that one expects. If you're going to complain about your water supply, or if you're going to complain about the price of bread or inflation or the lack of jobs, is that going to get an individual in trouble, and at what level?
Well, a lot of people have already gotten in trouble. Remember, there are 60,000 non-violent political prisoners in Egypt. Many of them are in jail for expressing the kinds of opinions that you just mentioned. Unfortunately, Egypt took a step forward with the revolution and then took about 2 or 3 steps backwards, and particularly since 2013. And these amendments further entrench military dictatorship in Egypt, and I think you can expect even more repression and power consolidation, unfortunately.
We'll have to see what happens when we get the results of this particular referendum. Mohamad Elmasry, thanks so much for joining us here on Al Jazeera.